What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where Black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. What's up, everybody in the chat, for those who are there or people who are viewing? So I'm going to jump right into this because today I promised to give you information about the 5 waves of feminism. Now, mostly, if you look on the internet, you'll find themes that discuss 3 waves or 4 waves. However, I am going to demonstrate that there's a 5th wave that is occurring now. But first, we have to go over all the other waves. So let me get right into this and not leave it up to me just explaining it. So what I'm going to share with you is a slide share presentation that wasn't even created by me, but was created by a graduate student, a teaching assistant who teaches women and gender studies. And we're going to look and examine that slide share presentation and get some sort of insight as to what women in the women and gender studies programs all throughout the country are thinking as it pertains to feminism, how it started, and where it is now. Okay. So I'm just going to make sure everybody's with me. Everybody seems to be on board with me. I think that this is sharing. I can't really tell, but let me just get right into it. So, first wave feminism, what exactly is it? It is commonly referred to as a movement that began in the 19th and the early 20th century. It started in Europe and North America kind of simultaneously. And ultimately, it was about gaining voting rights for women. So it was a suffrage movement, and it was a movement that sought to open up professions to women that had been closed to them. So suffrage and the entry of women into the workforce or into professions inside of the scope and range of the workforce. Okay. Now, the first wave, it happened not only in America, but it also occurred in Britain. Okay. Now, one of the first feminists was a woman by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft. And she had already written literature that argued against injustices that women had gone through, right? But it wasn't until the 1850s that women became organized and actually created a tangible movement in Britain. And some of the things that they were worried about were being able to become educated, being able to become employed. They wanted to have some sort of impact on marriage laws, and they wanted to bring to the fore the plight of middle class single women. Okay, so they wanted to make sure that they had access to education, employment. They wanted to have an impact on marriage laws, and they also wanted to bring to light some of the issues related to middle class women, single women. Okay. Now, they weren't interested in what was going on with working class women. I mean, this movement started off as a movement of middle class and elite women, right? And they didn't consider themselves to be feminist in the contemporary sense of the term, because the term wasn't officially coined until approximately 1895. So again, they were largely upper and middle class white women, and they were responding to what they perceived as injustices that they had suffered. So that's what first wave feminism in Britain was about. Okay. So they gained some accomplishments with their movement. So what they did was they opened up access to higher education for women. So they were able to go to college then. And they were able to institute reforms of secondary education for girls. And this included participation in formal national exams. They opened up access to the professions, especially the profession of medicine. They were able to secure some property rights for married women through this Married Women's Property Act of 1870. And they were also able to improve upon child custody rights for themselves in Britain during that time. Now, I don't know if you don't know, or if you do know, but when a woman entered into a divorce in Britain before 18, I think it's 37, the woman had to renounce all of her rights to the child. So for the most part in Britain during this time, men had all of the custody rights. All of them went to the man. But there was a law that was passed in the British Parliament which ensured that women were able to petition for the rights of their children up until the point of 7 years of age. And then I think it's 1873 or 1879, but I know during that time frame, there was a doctrine, another parliamentary law was passed called the Tender Years Doctrine. And this law enabled women to petition the court for custody of children up until the age of 17. So prior to that time, men had absolute custody. They had legal custody of children in the event of divorce. Now we can see how things have shifted. So men no longer are perceived as being the default custody holders, but now it's women. And it's all owing to some laws that were passed in Britain, because as you know, most of the laws in the United States or the judiciary is patterned after British law. It's called common law, but that's something that you ought to be aware of, right? And for the most part, they failed, though, to secure the woman's vote. That's one thing that they weren't able to do, right? So they in Britain, that is, they weren't able to secure the vote. So that's important to acknowledge. So while they were able to enter into college, they were able to take secondary school exams, which qualified them for access to professions. And while they were able to secure property rights and custody rights over children, they still weren't able to gain the right to vote. Now, many of the women during this time frame were in resistance against what they considered to be this concept called the angel in the house. And for the most part, the angel in the house is the idea that the woman inside of the context of marriage is supposed to be submissive, passive, cooperative, supportive. They were fighting against the notion that women had to be that way. To them, this was a stifling stereotype, and they wanted to be able to break past it. They wanted to be regarded as autonomous. They wanted to be regarded as not necessarily submissive, but on an equal level to that of the husband. So these were some of the ideals that they were working on. And you can see here the seeds of what many would consider to be, unwillingness to fulfill the traditional role associated with being a wife. And they were rejecting this idea that they needed to be managed in some way or be under the control of their husbands in the context of a marriage. Okay. So that's what the concept of the angel in the house actually is trying to articulate. Now, in the USA, the first wave of feminism began in the middle of the 19th century, and it lasted up until the 1960s. And I've kind of gone over this in some of my videos, but we've never really talked about the first wave. Okay. Now, some of the gains that feminists were able to get during the first wave of feminism in the United States were the right to vote and the right to practice birth control. So in July 13th, in 1848, which is after the Revolutionary War, right, 70 years after it, Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized what is called the Seneca Convention. And her plan during this convention was basically something that had never occurred before, right? They were meeting in order to have a discussion about the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women in the United States. So this is unprecedented. This is something that had never occurred before, okay? So this is what they discussed at the convention, right? And basically they signed or they created what was called the Declaration of Sentiments, right? And they objected to the following conditions that they felt they were subjected to. So they complained that women weren't allowed the right to vote, and that women had to submit to laws when they actually didn't have any representation in Congress, right? They argued that married women didn't have any property rights and that 90% of women over 25 were married at the time. So that's a large amount of women who had no property rights who were married. And they argued against the ideal, or the practice rather, that husbands had legal power over and responsibility for their wives. They could actually imprison and beat their wives without any fear of punishment. And of course, during this time, if a woman entered into a divorce with her husband, the husband would primarily be the person who gained custody, and the women didn't have very many rights, okay? So you can see how things have actually changed in this regard. And so it's just interesting to see the kind of things that they were arguing against and drawing attention to for themselves, but how men are in a similar situation at the current moment related to some of these issues. Okay, well, at least the child custody issue. Okay, right. So women also had to pay property taxes, although they didn't have any representation in how these taxes were going to be levied. And just like in Britain, most occupations were closed to women, and that when women did get to work, they didn't get paid as much as men got paid, right? They were not allowed to enter into law practices or medicine practices. And they didn't have a means to gain an education because during that time, colleges and universities wouldn't accept women students. And with a few exceptions, women weren't even allowed to participate in the affairs of the church. So they argued that women were robbed of their self-confidence and their self-esteem, and it made them totally, absolutely dependent upon the whims of men. So these were some of the things that they were arguing during the Seneca Falls Convention, right? So as you can expect, I mean, during this time, right, when they had this convention, men scoffed at it and they ridiculed it, but women pushed forward. They kept forging forward. So you got Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and even Sojourner Truth, a Black woman, was a person who championed women's rights during this time, okay? So what they wanted to do was change public opinion by means of continuously pushing this issue about women's rights, okay? So far, so good, right? So we're not gonna go over any questions here, but this is what's being taught in the school. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody for tuning in. I kind of ducked off for a minute. I can't see what you guys are doing or saying in the chat, but I do want to let you know, man, support the channel, support the G with a PhD at $G with a PhD. And I'm gonna duck my head off back into this and get going again, okay? So getting back to it, this is gonna come up later in relation to the role of race during the first wave of feminism. Black women really weren't participants in it. It was primarily a white woman's movement. And although you had Black men like Frederick Douglass who are in support of women's rights. And you had figures like Sojourner Truth and many other notable African Americans who were in favor of women gaining suffrage rights and rights to vote and to be educated. They aren't represented in the movement the way that they should have been, right? They weren't given the same sort of priority. White women were, for the most part, seeking to gain these rights for themselves. And I mean, if you go over the work of Tommy Curry, one of the things that he's going to mention is that the suffragette movement was extremely racist. And one of the talking points of these women was that they would prefer to have their right arm cut off before they would allow themselves to be governed by Negroes. So this is one of the talking points. I mean, one of the ways that they convinced the public to actually sign on to the feminist project was to do so in relation to the fear that they would instill by using racist tropes about Black men not having the capacity or the ability to govern. So that's just important to know. All right. So in the early turn of the 20th century, so Woodrow Wilson basically says, look, I'm going to support this amendment. And the next day, the House of Representatives actually passed it, but the Senate refused to debate it until a later time. And when the Senate finally did decide that they were going to take up the task of voting on an amendment to, allow women to gain suffrage rights and other rights that they were demanding, they didn't pass it at all. It failed the Senate. So it passed the House, but it failed the Senate. Okay. So in response to that, they basically urged citizens to vote against anti-suffrage senators because, it upset them. So what they wanted to do was ensure that they could get senators into the Senate who would be favorable to their movement. And so they made sure, they organized and they made sure that they were promoting candidates who were pro-suffrage. And eventually on May 21st, 1919, the House of Representatives passed the amendment by a landslide, and then also the Senate followed with a vote, and they won it by 56 over 44 senators. So they eventually gained the right to vote, right? 1919. Okay. So on August 18th, 1920, the Tennessee General Assembly, by a one-vote margin, became the 36th state legislature to ratify the 19th Amendment, making it a part of the U.S. Constitution. So on August 26, 1920, the Secretary of State in Bainbridge Colby certified the amendment's adoption. So the right to vote in America was actually granted to women in 1920. And this was 144 years after the Revolutionary War, which was predicated upon, right, men having inalienable rights. They were also afforded to women. Okay. So not only did women desire to have the right to vote, they also wanted control over their bodies. Okay. They wanted control over their reproductive systems in particular. So they began the birth control movement. And of course, as you know, one of the champions of the birth control movement was a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger, right? She was a public health nurse. And this concept of birth control and women having control over their reproductive systems is still in play today. Now, we all know the history of Margaret Sanger. Some say that she was a eugenicist. We all know that she was a profound racist. And one of the things that she wanted to do was prevent Black women from reproducing because, of course, you got to stop the expansion of the population of Black people because, we're savages and we're uncivilized. So anyway, in 1936, the Supreme Court declassified birth control information as obscene because it actually, I mean, the very notion of birth control was considered to be repulsive to the American population in the earlier part of the 20th century. So it wasn't even really publicly discussed without it being perceived as something that was repulsive. So until the later part of the 1930s, distributing birth control was actually a crime, and it was perceived as a crime on par with that of pornography. So it wasn't until 1965 that married couples in all states could actually use or get access to contraceptives, right? And so the woman here who devised this presentation is saying, well, you know, although birth control became legal in 1965, abortion, in terms of being legal, didn't follow up until approximately 1973, right? So that's when you get Roe versus Wade, and the law becomes one in which women are able to gain access to abortions as well as birth control. So that's important to know also, okay? I'm not gonna, review all that, and then we come to the next wave. And I just want to make sure I'm gonna duck back in and see if people are still there. All right, so we still got people here. So I'm just giving you the information just in case you didn't know. So the first wave, for the most part, was all about women gaining the right to vote and having access to birth control. That's what it's about, okay? Primarily, that's what this is about, all right? So I don't know what you all are saying in the chat. I really don't have access to anything you all are saying, all right? So anyway, we come to the second wave, right? And the second wave of feminism comes to the fore in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And it's kind of like concurrent with the civil rights movement. And this movement, the second wave feminist movement, was basically dedicated to bringing awareness to issues about sexism and patriarchy. So those were, the terms that actually became popular in the 60s and the 70s. So prior to that, you didn't hear any notions about patriarchy. Although women argued about sexism, they didn't couch it in those terms. You didn't hear anything about sexism or patriarchy. But in the 60s and in the early 70s, you start to hear conversations about sexism and patriarchy. So they wanted to ensure that abortion was legalized, and they wanted to make sure that women had access to birth control. Also, they wanted to push and fight for women's rights to be held as political and economic equals in the United States society. And also, concurrent with these aims was their desire to be able to have sexual liberation. All right, so you're going to start seeing them talk about being able to control and manage their own sexuality during the second wave feminism. So that really wasn't much of an issue in the first wave, but it becomes a big issue in the second wave. So, of course, as I just told you, second wave feminism rises out of the civil rights and anti-war movements in which women, disillusioned with their second-class status, even in the activist environment of student politics, began to band together and contend against what they considered to be discrimination, okay? Now, it's important to note that although white women may not have had a superior role or a contributory role in politics of the kind that they wanted, one could argue Black women have always enjoyed, the right to engage in political protestation in the Black community. I mean, the civil rights movement was a movement in which women played a handy and a hearty role. It wasn't just men organizing, and engaging in activism. Women and girls were there and present just as much as Black men and boys. So that's something to be aware of. Okay. And of course, the tactics, right? So we got to talk tactics. The presenter here in this slide basically says, so you get writers and people publishing literature, but some of the tactics were, writing, and some of them were going against the grain for beauty contests being discriminatory, and they also established pockets of consciousness raising groups. So they would meet together in schoolrooms, and they would meet together in coffee shops and stuff like that, and they would talk about the kind of issues that they were facing or the kind of experiences that they were going through. But the movement was never a unified movement. It was not something that was cohesive. They were never in complete consensus and agreement with one another at all. Okay. So you had differences between Black feminists, lesbian feminists, liberal feminists, social feminists. So you got all different kinds of variants and ideological brands or categories of feminism, right? So Black feminism is a little bit different from lesbian feminism, from liberal feminism to social feminism. Social feminism, I would say, is radical Marxist feminism. Liberal feminism, to me, is more about gaining an entry or a foothold in the economic and political sphere, equivalent to that of men. Lesbian feminism, of course, is self-explanatory, and Black feminism is Black women complaining that they don't have the same amount of notoriety within the context of the movement itself. So that's what this is all about. Okay. So I'm not going to go into that. And the author begins to talk about second wave feminism in Britain. And basically it was, for the most part, similar, but to them, in Britain, it was more about socialism, and it was about workplace protestation or workplace democracy, right? So they were some of the most ardent defenders of this idea of equal pay for equal work. So when you start hearing ideas about equal pay, equal work, it's coming from Britain, and it's coming from the idea of workplace democracy, and it's based on socialist reasoning. That's important to know. So all of this is second wave, right? And then you get this slogan that comes up. This is also important. The very idea that the personal is political, right? And some people say that this is like the primary slogan of second wave feminism, right? So the idea is that things that impact or that affect women on a personal level become politicized, right? Now, I don't know if you have any understanding of politics in general, but typically, when you talk about politics, you're not talking about private people making private decisions just for themselves. Typically, politics has always been considered to be an endeavor in which people were able to look beyond their own interest and to consider the interest of the entirety of society. It wasn't something that you go into thinking that, okay, I'm just going to look out for my own constituency. You engage in public life and you use public reasons. And what are public reasons? They're reasons that everyone else can accept because you're making arguments that are not of a private kind, but a public kind. So what they wanted to do was to politicize their personal self-interest or their personal experiences. So they wanted interventions in the areas of reproduction, sexuality. They wanted to be more visible culturally, and they wanted to change their domestic and their private lives. So those are some of the things that they were working for during the second wave, right? And another bullet point that's being set forth here is the idea that second wave feminists basically see women's cultural and political inequalities as linked, right? So the fate of women is connected together, right? And in order to understand their personal lives, you have to understand that those personal lives are politicized and that they, in some way or another, reflect power structures that they don't have control over. So their personal lives became, again, politicized in a way that had never been seen before. So it's important to know that this movement, one could argue, it's been the most successful movement in the entirety of the world, not just the Western world, but the second and third world. This movement has been the most successful movement in the history of Western society, and one could argue even, again, second and third world societies. Now, what are some of the major events that have happened in the second wave? So you had a commission on the status of women, and it was created by the Kennedy administration, and Eleanor Roosevelt was its chair, right? This is the wife of FDR. And the report basically argued in 1963 that there was too much discrimination against women, and this discrimination, for the most part, had entered into or seeped into every area of American life. That was one of the major findings of this commission on the status of women, okay? Also, another major event in the second wave of feminism was Betty Friedan's release of a book called The Feminine Mystique, okay? Now, women began to read this book, and it changed the landscape of the way women were orientated towards the world. So it basically was a look into a woman's life, and she was married at the time, but she got divorced from her husband. And one of the things that she said in this book was that a woman being a housewife is kind of like being in a concentration camp, but it's a comfortable concentration camp. So, I mean, these are some of the kind of, imagery, those some of the kind of images that were being put forth or set forth in the context of this movement. The idea that women are like slaves or they're like prisoners in their own homes, right? And it became a bestseller. It was like, I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of Betty Friedan before, now you've heard of her, but just look her up. I mean, this book had a deep impact, and it kind of corroborated what was being reported in the Women's Commission, right? And also, during the second wave of feminism, you get the introduction of Title VII, and for the most part, Title VII is a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it makes it illegal to prohibit employment discrimination on the basis of sex and race, religion, and national origin. So a lot of times people look at the Civil Rights Act and they see it only as an act dedicated towards dealing with racial issues, but that's not true. And you got to be aware of that. So you've always had this connection between sex as well as race. It wasn't just race, it was sex and race. And that's important to know as you move forward and try to deal with issues, especially issues related to Black men, because a lot of times we're trying to use acts and rights and legislation and legal action related to legislation, and with the mindset that it's all about race, when in actuality, the ways these laws were drafted, sex was conjoined to race, right? So anyway, it was added to the bill. And it is true. I mean, they snuck this in. And some people thought that it would be, the very thing that would actually kill the Civil Rights Act from being able to become passed. But eventually, it didn't kill the bill. It actually was able to move forward and become law. So then you get in 72, which was a year after I was born, you get Title IX. And Title IX, of course, is something that applies within the domain of education. And ultimately, what Title IX does is it forbids discrimination in the field of education. So Title IX, for the most part, works for women on campuses and makes sure that women are able to engage in the same kind of sports activities as men on campuses. And there are many other things that it encompasses, but one of the primary aims of it was to make sure that there was parity in the experience of women at the university level, commensurate or equivalent to that of men inside of the university system. Okay. So one of the main complaints of women, even though they were able to get laws passed, was that even though there is de jure anti-discrimination laws passed, or even though there were anti-discrimination laws passed, the de facto status of women was that they were still being discriminated against, right? So they evidenced this by the amount of complaints that women have made all throughout the country for a wide variety of reasons, whether it's a Title IX claim or a Title VII claim. So those are some things to keep in mind. So, I mean, the idea is that although women have, been able to benefit from these laws being passed, the argument they're making is that they're still discriminated against. Okay. So they also passed, okay. Well, I'm not going to say they also passed, but because they felt as if the passages of the laws, the Civil Rights Act and Title IX after it, they still felt that there was a need for women, to have advocacy. So they founded this organization called the National Organization for Women, right? And basically, this organization was kind of like a legal organization. So they wanted to, make sure that wherever women were, that people were actually following these laws. And so it's almost like what the NAACP was for Black people. So you get this National Organization of Women, and it's supposed to make sure that women are protected in the university and jobs and in other areas of society. So basically, as it starts out, it's primarily directed and orientated towards white women, but then it comes to absorb the interest of Black women, Latina women, Asian women, lesbians. Then they start to protect the status and the rights of women on welfare, women who own businesses, women who want to get into politics and professional life. So it's an organization just like the NAACP, but for women. So that's important to know also, okay? But then you get on 73, or in 73, on January 22nd, Roe versus Wade is passed, right? And basically what everybody knows, this is the right for women to have an abortion, right? So the decision legalized abortion in all 50 states. However, the states had to decide whether or not they were going to participate in it and allow women to have abortions. So that's something to be mindful of too. So they get, the second wave is about abortion. They get the NOW organization, they get Title VII, and they get Title IX. And some of the things that they're worried about are reproduction rights. And, they want to kind of buttress the kind of, or prop up what it started in the first wave. Right? I don't want to go through all of this intimately because some of it can get a little, it can get a little intimate, and I don't want to get too discerning here. So then you get the third wave, right, which comes along after the second wave. And the third wave, for the most part, comes along right around like the late 80s, early 90s. And it doesn't argue that feminism is done with, but what they wanted to do is to expand upon what occurred in the second wave. But they wanted to do new things with the women's movement, right? So what are the things that they want to do, right? So they basically, in the third wave, began to argue that all women are not white women and that other women need to be interpolated into the women's struggle. So they began to interpolate the concerns and the interest of Black women, Hispanic women, third world women, and they wanted to make sure that there was a more inclusive voice for these women who belong to what they consider to be subaltern publics or subaltern groups, right? So the idea is that, okay, now women have the right to vote. They get Title VII, they get Title IX, they get the right to abortion, but still the concerns and interests of women who are not considered to be the norm, white women, right? Their interests have been kind of sidelined. So this is the point, third wave feminism, right? Where you start to get Black women, Latino women, Asian women involved more heavily and more deeply within the feminist movement's causes, right? So in addition, as feminism moved into colleges and universities, feminism became even more splintered as different political, intellectual, and pedagogical interests became attached to it. So you get something called psychoanalytic feminism, which is dealing with the psychology of women and how the world impresses upon women this subservient kind of psyche that they need to escape from. You get Marxist feminism, which is like a radical social kind of feminism, right? And so feminism is not just a political movement, but it becomes also an ideology with distinct kinds of interest and aims within the context of the larger movement, right? I want to skip past this, right? So again, like I said, it's in the late 80s, early 90s, and women in their 20s, middle class women in their 30s expressed concerns with retaining second wave feminist agendas, and they tried to create new projects and focus on new issues relating to race, sexuality, and fighting against what they considered to be the backlash. Because some people were of the opinion, okay, well, feminism is kind of going too far. I mean, now you got all of these laws, you get all of these rights, and you get all of these, acts. So therefore, any other push would kind of be like pushing it over the boundaries. Not you're doing too much is what some people, had begun to argue. But the idea for them during this time was, well, we can't stop now. We've just begun to fight. We have to continue to struggle in behalf of what they think or their self-interest, right? So they basically try to interpolate the diversity of feminisms into new activist domains, right? And they challenged the focus of the older feminists and the agendas of the second wave and began to push these new agendas. And of course, I mean, as you know, I don't want to talk about Alice Walker's daughter, but it's funny though, on a sidebar, because one of Alice Walker's kids later comes out and says that her mother was a terrible mom, that all of her attention was dedicated to this political work and like making her her professional writing be popularized, but she was like a horrible mother. I gotta find that article. Maybe a little bit later in the stream I'll find that article. But so basically, if I had to really actually encompass it all, you start to get intersectional feminism during this time, which basically argues that, of course, that women are not a monolith and women have different races. Women are they have different sexualities, and so they wanted to interpolate like this intersectional idea within the framework of what had already been done in terms of work in the feminist movement. So those were, I mean, if I had to break it down in a nutshell, I would say third wave feminism actually is intersectional feminism. That's what I would say it is, right? So that's what I would call that. I don't want to go too deep into, because this is her stuff, man. But this is what's being taught, right? So what's interesting though is that she does in the context of this presentation talk about bell hooks, right? Which a lot of black male scholars talk about also. And I recently had an interview with Tommy Curry, and he talked about bell hooks and some of the proclamations she makes, and how some of the the claims that she does put forth in a work seem to be tied heavily to subculture theory, black subculture theory. But that's all you got to do is watch that video for that. But so getting outside of that, I want to get to the fourth wave, right? So all she really does is cover the first three waves. I want to make sure what y'all doing in the chat. What's good, brothers? Let me stop that. So thank you, Joe from DC. I want to give you a shout out for the donation. Please support the channel, man. I'm putting in work here. And if you need to hit me up, you can hit me on the Cash App. You see the name right there with the $ in front of it. That's how you Cash App me. So those are the first three waves of feminism. But now you are in what one could argue the fourth wave of feminism. Okay. Now the fourth wave of feminism is different than the first wave, which was primarily about suffrage rights. And you start to get this glance at reproduction. But the second wave, of course, is different in that they push it further, right? And now it becomes about being able to engage in public life, to enter into the economy. You get issues related to sexuality. And then the third wave comes along and accentuates upon race and gender and class. But now you're moving into the fourth wave of feminism. Now some people, are in disagreement about what the fourth wave of feminism is about. But if I had to encapsulate what fourth wave feminism is about, I would say that the fourth wave is primarily about women feeling optimistic, pretty much overly optimistic by third wave feminism. And fourth wave feminism is primarily about women wanting to use the internet. They want to use the workplace. They want to use activism. They want to use the academy as ways to push forth, the project of feminism. So I don't know. It's important for you to understand that directly after second wave feminism, a lot of women who were part of the feminist movement, they retreated to the university and they founded the women and gender studies programs that you find all throughout universities in the country. And so, and they also, they wanted to use not only social media, but they also wanted to, propagandize their goals and their interests through popular media, not only in, movies and books, but also on news shows. So, I mean, fourth wave feminism is basically using promotion, not only in the academy, but that's a large part of it, but also using it in popular culture so as to make their goals more palatable, more acceptable. And it's worked like a charm. All you got to do is look everywhere you look. All you got to do is watch a movie nowadays. You'll see it everywhere. It's all over the place. Like Did you see the new movie with Jamie Foxx? So in the movie with Jamie Foxx, you got a young black girl there, right? And the young black girl is the protagonist along with Jamie Foxx in the movie. Now, in the past, that might have been a little black boy. And not to say that black women can't play these kind of roles, but you're increasingly seeing more and more women being given roles of leadership, or given roles of being the heroines of the story, the main protagonist of the story, as opposed to men, specifically black men. So also, Chadwick Boseman just died. God bless that brother. And he was playing the role of Black Panther. But now, from our understanding, the young lady who played the role of Shuri, she's going to be perceived as the rightful follow-up for the role. So she's going to replace Chadwick Boseman and become the Black Panther. So increasingly, it's a movement by which the fourth wave, it's a movement by which to try and make the aims and the goals of feminism part of popular culture. And I can argue it's worked like a charm. It has, okay? But when it comes to fifth wave feminism, there is no concrete definition of it yet, because it's just now starting to form. But this is feminism turning in on itself, because as I understand it, there are a group of women who are upset at the notion of third wave feminists arguing and fourth wave feminists arguing that trans women are actually women. So you're starting to see a backlash, or a kind of like a internal conflict arising within the context of the feminist movement itself, because there are some feminists who don't regard trans women as real women. And the argument is, well, if you haven't lived life as a woman, how can you actually know what it's like to experience the world as a woman the way that a real woman would, right? So those are some of the kind of internal conflicts taking place. But I would consider fifth wave feminism to be a kind of feminism that's going back to try to naturalize the movement and to promote the aims and concerns of women who were born as women, as opposed to women who perform as women, right? And that's important to know. So those are the five waves. So you got, again, the first wave dedicated to ensuring that women get the right to vote. And the second, there's this discussion about reproductive rights, right? Then you get second wave feminism again, and it comes in and it expands upon the first wave, but it argues for social and political rights for women, and it starts to change the private lives of women by pushing for greater rights over what happens in the home, what happens in the workplace, and what happens on colleges and universities. And they also have like some of their issues shoehorned into the Civil Rights Act. And then the third wave of feminism is intersectional feminism, which introduces not only the interest of white working class women or white middle class and elite women, but also those of Black, Latino, and Asian women. And then you get fourth wave feminism, which is beginning to, has begun. I would say that the fourth wave is where we are now, and we're moving into the fifth wave. But the fourth wave is picking up and expanding upon what has occurred in the third wave, and is becoming a means of further reinforcing all of the goals and the implications in the third wave. But they're using social media and popular culture in order to further, push forward with those aims. And then the fifth wave is almost like a rejection of anybody who's not a natural woman, or a woman, born a woman. A cisgendered woman is what they would call it, because a trans woman is going to be different than a cisgendered woman. So a trans woman, of course, is a woman, you know, the way they talk about it is a woman who decides to become a woman. So those are the 5 ways. You got any questions about any of this? If you do have any questions, I'm gonna leave an invite to the stream. But I wanted to get that out of the way, because a lot of times people talk about feminism and they speak about it as if it's, you know, a uniform movement, and it's not. It comes along in stages. And I mean, there are even women, well, I can give you a link to the website where I got it from, and then that way you can have access to it. So let me make sure that I get this to you. I'm doing this all by myself, so I'm trying to make it happen. So this is the site where I got the slide share from, and it's a woman named Jamie Pond who put it together. She's a teaching assistant at what university is she at? I don't know. I can't remember the university where she teaches, but the University of Kentucky, I think. But just know that this stuff is being taught, right? And of course, Black men are impacted by this, because it's almost like a slap in the face to us, because we have suffered from the same kind of oppression that Black women have suffered from prior to the passage of the Civil Rights Acts. But it just seems as if we weren't written into, you know, the kind of gangs that Black women were shoehorned into, because we didn't have a movement to latch on to, because men were already perceived as having, you know, an advantage over women. And so if you're, and thank you, Man Friday. So if you already have advantages conceptually, there's no need to usher you into anything. And then, you know, you get writers like Bell Hooks and, you know, a host of other, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, and a whole host of other thinkers. You know, they start writing literature about Black men being rapists and abusers, and it's almost like a slap in the face, because, I mean, Black men go through a lot of abuse with women, and we don't say anything about it. But we have data now that's beginning to demonstrate that, as it pertains to rape or sexual assault, men also are vulnerable to those kind of atrocities. And also, as it pertains to domestic violence, men are also subjected to the phenomenon. But it operates differently for men, because men, as feminists conceptualize them, they're the ones who are the perpetrators of violence. They're the ones who are, you know, kind of like the arbiters of abuse. And so our vulnerabilities and the things that we suffer from are never brought to the fore. And then also, men are socialized to protect and to provide for women. He says it's glitching. Is my stream glitching? I apologize for any technical difficulties that you might be experiencing, but nothing's glitching for me. So I don't know what you were able to hear and what you weren't able to hear. But am I back now? So if there's nobody who wants to participate, all I wanted to do was kind of elucidate some of the let me see here. People are saying that they're getting glitches. So it's not glitching for me. All right, so we're all good there. Are there any particular questions that you have for me about any of these various ways of feminism? I'm leaving a link there for you to ask me the question. And if not, I do want to make you aware of the fact that I got a stream coming up tomorrow with Dr. Johnson, and we're going to go over the concept of black male privilege. And then we're going to follow up with on Monday. I'm going to have Dr. Ronald Neal on the channel, and we're going to have a conversation about what I consider to be racial hypergamy. And then next Friday, I'm going to have a live stream, and we're going to have a discussion about one of my colleagues who's from Kenya, and we're going to have a discussion about Pan-Africanism again from the perspective of an African. And we're going to talk about ADOS. We'll have a conversation about people from all over and the impact of white supremacy on black people throughout the entirety of the world. So it's a global thing. So my brother Joe from DC asked the question, why do you think it was so easy for our women not all to side with white women? So I mean, I don't like you. Are you asking the question saying they all did side with white women? Well, to them, it's not a scam. To them, it works. I mean, black women are doing well relative to black men. Because I've always said this: if you want to look at how well black men are doing, first of all, you have to look at how they're doing in comparison with white men. You can't look at black men and determine whether or not they're doing well by looking at either white women or black women. You have to look at how they're doing in comparison to white men. And if black men are doing way worse than everybody else, then you know something's amiss. You know something's foul. But I mean, think about it. You got women during the first wave and second wave of feminism arguing about their rights as it pertains to reproduction and their rights to be able to divorce. Just think about it. What kind of existence do black men experience at the current moment? Like right now, it's us. The kids automatically go to the women. 150 years ago, that did not occur. If you got divorced from a man, the kids automatically went with the man. It wasn't until certain laws were passed in a British Parliament that actually started to change. So if my memory serves me correctly, I got to pull it up here because I did have it. I must have deleted it, but hold on. I'm gonna find it for you right now. I just got to look through my Facebook page because I sent a message to one of my colleagues here and to give him the information about it. Yeah, so okay, here it is. So before England enacted what's called the Custody of Infants Act, and that was in 1839, okay? It's called the Custody of Infants Act. Before that act was passed in England, men received full custody of children in divorce cases. Men were considered to be the primary caretakers of children, not women. That's important to note because right now, I mean, you just take it as a given that women are the primary caretakers of children. There's no doubt in my mind that no man thinks that they're the primary caretaker of children. I guarantee you that. I'm willing to bet my life on it. Okay. And I've said this before. And then Hold on, let me refresh this stream because everybody's saying I'm going in and out. Let me refresh this thing. Okay, I'm back now. I don't know if I'm going in and out. Some people are saying that the stream is okay. Some people are saying that it's cutting on and off. Am I breaking up now, or is everything okay? Let me know. Give me a 1 if I'm doing okay. Okay, now I'm not getting any feedback from any of you all. Still got people on the stream, but it says I'm still cutting in and out. Still going in and out. Some people say I'm going in and out. Some people say everything is just fine. So I don't know what's going on or why it's going on the way it's going on. So yeah, a lot of people are saying they don't have any issues whatsoever. So I can't really speak to it. Maybe it's the nature of what it is I'm doing. One of the tactics of fourth wave feminism is to use the media. Use social media in order to advance their aims. So, cancel culture is part of fourth wave feminism. But like as I was saying though, so prior to 1839 in Britain, men got full custody of the kids. And then in 1873, okay, that's the time. 1873, Parliament extended the age to 16. I said 17, but it's 16. And they did so under something that they called the tender years doctrine, right? So this is the very point. So in the mid 19th century, this is when you get a change related to who gets kids and who doesn't. So I don't know what's going on, man. Maybe I have to stop the stream and come back at another time, but maybe on my end everything is fine and you can go back and listen to everything. But I can't tell if if there are any issues or not. All I know is I'm doing what I normally do here, and so everything seems to be good to me. So I hate that you're experiencing issues and technical difficulties. I really don't know what's going on. Some people are saying I'm good. Other people have said that I'm not doing good in terms of technical issues. So anyway, that's what's going on. So I'm gonna bring Ronald Neal here on Monday. Next Monday. I got another brother coming on from Kenya. I got Dr. Johnson coming on tomorrow. So that's how it's going down. And I want to thank the brother Deacon Woods for hitting me off with a donation on the Cash App. So also I do want to alert you. I know you might not be interested in this, but I'm also doing a series on the philosophy of science. And there's one reason why I'm doing this, because a lot of times we get into arguments about issues in the manosphere and a lot of claims get made. And sometimes we get into confusion about what's real, what's justified, what's not justified, what's true, what's not true, what we should and what we shouldn't believe in relation to things that we make about, in reference to claims about the social world. We got to get more meticulous about how we make our arguments. And so that's why I'm providing the context for that series. So that's what I'm doing it for. Okay. So anyway, I'm gonna cut out of this because I see I got a lot of technical difficulties going on. But please support the brother G with a PhD on the channel, man. And I'll talk to y'all later, man. 1.